Hi, my name is Adriana Cutler, and I am a Senior Program Officer in the Division of Preservation and Access at the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the Coordinator for the Preservation Assistance Grant for Smaller Institutions Funding Program. Thank you all for joining us today to learn more about this program and how it might fit your institutional needs. Thanks also to my colleague Sean Ferguson, who will be assisting with Q&A. Today we'll go over what Preservation Assistance Grants, or PAG, can fund, share some examples of previously funded projects, and go over how you can apply for an award. I'll offer some suggestions for writing a good application and answer some frequently asked questions. That should leave us with plenty of time to answer any of your specific questions. Please type your questions into the Q&A box on the right side of your screen, which Sean will be monitoring during the presentation. And note that closed captioning is available by clicking the CC box at the lower right-hand corner of your screen. The Preservation Assistance Grant Program is administered by NEH's Division of Preservation and Access, which is one of the 7 divisions and offices that run grant programs. We recognize that in small organizations, implementing preservation needs may happen incrementally. Therefore, this program is designed to cover a wide range of needs, to encourage repeat applications, and to support a combination of preservation activities. At its heart, the point of this program is to enable small and mid-sized organizations to bring in outside experts in conservation and preservation to provide advice and build institutional capacity. For those institutions who have never had one, we often recommend starting with a general preservation assessment by a qualified consultant whose preservation skills and expertise are related to the types of collections that are the focus of your project. For instance, you may require a conservator with a specialty in objects, or paper, or paintings. Similarly, you will want to find a consultant who is knowledgeable about the preservation of collections in your type of institution, whether a library, archive, museum, or other cultural heritage organization. These assessments give organizations a roadmap with the steps they'll need to take to improve the physical care and intellectual control of their collections. Assessments also provide recommendations for preservation supplies and equipment, such as acid-free storage boxes, archival photo sleeves, archival shelving, or environmental monitoring equipment such as data loggers or light meters, which may also be purchased with PAG awards. This program can also fund more specific consultations with preservation and conservation professionals, such as digital preservation assessments, conservation assessments, and the development of disaster preparedness and response plans. Finally, institutions may also request funds through a general PAG request for education and training in preservation and collections care for their staff and volunteers. As you can see on this slide, most PAC awards are up to $10,000. Your project may take up to 18 months to complete, beginning as early as September 1st in the year that you apply. Funding requests can be for any one or a combination of these activities. And except for the special circumstances I'll elaborate on now, conservation treatment and digitization or other methods of reformatting are not eligible. Along with our regularly allowable activities, PAG has 2 special encouragements. The first is for institutions in federally declared disaster areas. If your organization's collections have recently been impacted by a hurricane, flood, wildfire, derecho, or other natural disaster, you may request funding for response, recovery, and mitigation activities, such as conservation treatment, temporary storage or relocation, and the purchase of cleaning equipment or remediation supplies. When appropriate, you may also request funding for reformatting as a preservation method. Again, these activities are only eligible for those in federally declared disaster areas, but they can be combined with any of the activities I discussed on the previous slide. Our second special encouragement ties to NEH's A More Perfect Union initiative, which encourages projects that explore, reflect on, and tell the stories of our quest for a more just, inclusive, and sustainable society throughout our history. In support of this initiative, applicants may request up to $15,000 for consultations, planning, and pilot work with one or more humanities professionals, such as American historians, archivists, librarians, preservation specialists, and/or curators, that would position smaller institutions to preserve and create enhanced access to their humanities collections for use in activities that would address the themes of a more perfect union. Pilot work may include some cataloging, arrangement and description, or digitization, and projects can also include educational and training opportunities. As is the case with all PAG requests, projects can include multiple activities. The important thing to note for institutions seeking to apply under the A More Perfect Union initiative is that projects must include both consultation with a humanities professional and planning activities toward a specific outcome related to commemorating the semi-quincentennial. To get a better sense of the kinds of projects funded through PAG, here are a few examples. Spelman College, a historically Black college and university, received an award focused on their archival collections, including administrative records, newspapers, yearbooks, and photographs depicting life at the Women's College. The grant enabled them to hire a consultant to perform a preservation assessment, purchase some initial preservation supplies, including a HEPA vacuum, as recommended by the consultant, and for staff to attend online training on disaster planning and collections handling and documentation. This is an example of a case where the institution, Spelman College, is large, but the unit within it, the archives, is smaller. The Chicago Film Archives hired a consultant to perform a digital preservation assessment, which provides recommendations for how best to preserve born digital and digitized collections. The project also resulted in a digital collections policy for the archive's over 25,000 and growing collection of films, prints, videotapes, audio tapes, and ephemera reflecting life in the Midwest between 1903 and the late 1990s, which now amount to over 20 terabytes of data. In 2017, massive wildfires in Northern California damaged 40% of the collections at the DeRosa Center for Contemporary Art. They were one of the first applicants to take advantage of our special encouragement for those in federally declared disaster areas, and received an award to conserve the kinetic sculpture Wind House by Ned Kahn. The dynamic piece sits atop a hill at the nexus of art and hiking trails at the DeRosa Preserve, helping to bridge art with the environment. An example of a funded project addressing our A More Perfect Union initiative is an award made to the Noah Webster Foundation. With PAC funds, this historical society in Connecticut is developing a digitization plan to enhance access to its collections related to American lexicographer Noah Webster Jr. and the residents of West Hartford. The project also includes various planning activities in consultation with the town historian and a professional archivist to understand how its collections can better support local teachers in history and civic education in the lead up to 2026. Now, these are just a few examples of the types of projects that can be funded through PAG. For more examples of successful projects to help inspire your own institution, I recommend checking the Division of Preservation and Access blog on NEH.gov for posts on previous PAG awardees, including our 50 States of PAG series. Now that you have an idea of the kinds of activities that can be funded, let's go over who can apply and how. Applicants must be U.S. not-for-profit organizations, institutions of higher education, state and local government agencies, or federally recognized tribal governments. Individuals, foreign, and for-profit organizations are not eligible. Applicants must also show that they care and have custody or responsibility for the collections that are the focus of the application. have at least one staff member or full-time equivalent, paid or unpaid, and make their collections available for research, education, and/or public programming purposes. Along with our programmatic encouragements, we also want to encourage certain institution types and communities to apply. Those include small and mid-sized organizations that have never applied to NEH for an award, community colleges, tribal colleges and universities, historically Black colleges and universities, Hispanic serving institutions, Native American tribes, and Native Alaskan and Native Hawaiian organizations, and other collecting institutions whose community collections highlight underrepresented communities. If your organization does not line up with one of these areas, you should absolutely still apply. The encouragements are meant to signify particular interests of ours, but they are not meant to privilege certain types of projects or applicants. By now, you're probably wondering what you need to include in your proposal. Knowing that most of our applicants to this program are in small organizations, we try to make the application process as straightforward as possible. The main component of a PAG application is the project narrative. This is a 5-page, single-spaced document where you will describe your collections and the activities you would like to undertake, and answer the questions that help address the review criteria. Before sitting down to write your narrative, you may want to do some information gathering with colleagues, audience members, or other stakeholders. Get a good sense of your organization's mission, the scope and content of your collections, your audience, and what you provide them. If general public is a large portion of your audience, think about how that breaks down. Does it include genealogists, families, lifelong learners? Gather some numbers to help illustrate your case, and be sure to have a good sense of previous preservation work or established priorities. This should make the writing a bit easier. It is okay to format your narrative in a short answer approach, listing the questions as they appear in the Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO, and then your response. It is also important to be clear up front regarding which activities you are seeking funding. Then, you will want to describe the content and size of the humanities collections that are the focus of the project, how they are currently used, and how the proposed project would increase access and use of said collections. Tell us why your collections are significant, locally and regionally, and ways that they may fit in with national themes in American history. Including some interesting and specific examples will help strengthen your case. You will then need to describe the nature and mission of your institution and state whether your organization has ever received a preservation or conservation assessment, as well as the importance of the project to your institution. Finally, you will want to discuss the project staff and consultants and their qualifications. For those applicants who are applying under the Special Encouragement for Disaster Response, you can use up to one more page to answer additional questions found on page 10 of the NOFO, related to how the disaster impacted your institution and caused risk and damage to your collections. In addition to the narrative, we ask you to include some supporting information to bolster your case for funding. All applicants must submit a budget and budget justification, which is a written explanation of the line items in your budget. If your project includes voluntary cost share, this is where you would include it. Your total on your budget form should be equal to your total request from NEH. Another requirement is the inclusion of a detailed work plan, where you outline the specific steps to achieve your project's goals. You may want to format this as a bulleted list or table. A monthly or quarterly breakdown is often a helpful level of detail. And you may also want to make note of who's working on what. Also, don't forget to build in a little padding time. If reasonable for your project, we recommend requesting the full 18 months allowed. After the last 2 years, we all know that unexpected emergencies arise and shipments arrive late, causing unexpected delays to your project. Finally, all applicants must include resumes or CVs for the staff and consultants participating in the project. Applicants who are requesting funds for a consultant must also include a letter of commitment from said consultant. And applicants requesting only supplies or equipment must include the previous assessment on which the request is based. While not required, other supporting documents, including workshop descriptions, supporting materials, or disaster-related activities and other documents, are encouraged. Please limit your additional documentation to 10 pages, and be sure to consult page 20 of the NOFO for a list of forms and documents that must or may be included in your application package. As you prepare to compose your application, I highly recommend reading the sample narratives we have listed on the program resource page on the NEH website. You don't have to imitate them, but you can use them as an example of how someone else made a case for their project, and they can help you think about structure and form. For more tips on what makes a good proposal and the application process in general, please read the Tips on Applying for a Preservation and Access Award at the top of our blog. As I mentioned when discussing the narrative portion of the application, the program has specific review criteria that we ask our panelists to consider when reading your proposal. Here are the criteria for PAG. As you can see, these criteria focus on the significance of the materials, the appropriateness of the work planned, and the qualifications of the staff. The criteria are included in the Notice of Funding Opportunity, and I recommend you print them out or keep them open on your computer so that you can have them top of mind as you are writing your application. It's very important that you begin early on in the practical matters of submitting your application. Applications to NEH are submitted through a web portal called grants.gov. It is a fairly smooth system, but it would be good for you to spend some time getting familiar with it before you submit your application. Along with grants.gov, you will also need to be registered with SAM.gov, or the System for Award Management. These registrations can take up to 1 month, so I recommend checking your registration status or working with your Office of Sponsored Projects, if you have one, early on in the application process, so that you don't encounter any issues when it is time to submit your application. The next deadline is 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on January 13th, 2022. However, I recommend submitting your application a day or two in advance. That way, if your application is rejected for a technical reason, such as an invalid file type, you have a chance to correct the issue and resubmit before the deadline closes. Unfortunately, we are only able to give extensions in cases of major weather events, such as hurricanes or floods, or if the grants.gov system itself was down. Should you need any assistance with the technical submission process, grants.gov support is available 24/7. Please follow the requirements and naming conventions described in the NOFO carefully as you develop the PDFs that you will upload into grants.gov. Full details on submission of your application can be found on page 26 of the NOFO. Every NEH grant application goes through a process of peer review. Applications are sorted into panels with regard to institution or collection type. For instance, historic house museums, public libraries, art collections, and library special collections. Then my colleagues and I identify people like you working in your field. Each review panel typically includes administrators in smaller organizations, content specialists and conservators, or other preservation specialists. They will evaluate the applications based on the criteria we went over, assign a rating, and write comments. NEH staff then takes these panel recommendations to the July meeting of the National Council on the Humanities, pictured here, a board of 26 humanities professionals appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. The NEH chair, who has the sole authority to grant funding, takes all these recommendations into account when making award decisions. All this means that your application is being evaluated by people like you, people who know the humanities and who understand the work you do. Once the chair has made final decisions, notifications will go out sometime in August. After awards are announced, all applicants may request to see the reviewers' written comments. These can prove helpful for providing information to improve a funded project or in developing an application for resubmission, if an application was not successful this time around. Preservation and Access staff are always available to answer your questions, but here are a few we receive frequently that I am happy to answer now. Many institutions call us wondering if they would be considered small or mid-sized. Because we work with so many different institution types, like museums, libraries, and historical societies, it is not possible for us to give a clear-cut answer based on factors such as collection size, staff, or budget. Instead, we invite you to make the case for how your institution is small or mid-sized compared to other like organizations. I will also note that smaller units within larger institutions, such as university museums or archives, generally fit this definition. And please note that this is not one of the review criteria. If you would like to see a list of more projects that have been funded through PAG, you can click the Search All Past Awards link toward the bottom of the NEH website. Many applicants also ask us how they can find a consultant. Generally, you will want to find a preservation specialist whose expertise is aligned with the type of collections you have and with your institution type. While we cannot recommend specific consultants, you can find links on page 32 of the NOFO that will help you with your search. I hope this presentation has been helpful. We now have some time to respond to your questions live. Please type your questions into the Q&A box. Sean has already been answering specific questions and identifying questions that might be interesting to a broad audience. We'll try to answer as many of those as we can. If your question isn't answered today, you can email it to preservation@neh.gov or call 202-606-8570. Myself, Sean, and the rest of the Preservation and Access team are always here to assist you through the application process. And to sign up for email updates on PAG and other NEH funding programs, please visit the link on this slide. So with that, we would like to open it up to any of your questions now. So Sean, do we have any questions from the audience?
Yes, I've got about 5 or 6 questions here queued up for you that I think a few people would like to hear the answer to. So the first one is a good one. Will projects that include voluntary cost share be more competitive than those who don't? Or will this not be a point of consideration in the review process?
That is a great question. So we do not consider that really a point in the review process. You are not required to include any voluntary cost share. And because of that, we don't want that to be a consideration. We do basically tell our panelists that they should be looking to your narrative and the CVs and your work plan to really assess the institutional commitment to the project.
Great. Now, the next question, I think, speaks to the order of operations of different activities that you might want to perform in a Preservation Assistance Grant Award. The question is, in order for our library to apply for new shelving for our rare books room, should we first need to have the collection evaluated by a conservator?
That is a great question. We do typically prefer to have some sort of preservation assessment prior to a larger request for supplies such as shelving. And this is because it's really important to have the collection assessed by a preservation specialist. It could be a conservator, could be a different kind of preservation specialist, but they can really get a sense of the needs of your collection within that space. And then that will assist in terms of making sure that the actual shelving type that you're requesting is making the best use of that space and providing the correct environment for your collections. That said, you don't have to have received that preservation assessment through NEH. You could certainly have done that outside of NEH funding and come to us with that assessment. But we do typically like to see some assessment done for larger rehousing furnishings.
Great. Our next question is about the preservation consultants. Who would qualify as a preservation consultant? What qualifications do they need? And they're thinking of seeing if their own archivist would qualify. Not an uncommon type of question.
Sure, absolutely. So again, you want to make sure that the person who is doing that assessment or doing that work has had a background in preservation. So sometimes your archivist may have that background, but in some cases it may not be appropriate. And so it's really useful, I think, to look at who are some of the preservation and conservation specialists out there to sort of get a sense of if their expertise and CVs might align with your own institutional staff. So for that, again, I recommend taking a look at the links that we have on our NOFO to places to find consultants so that you can sort of compare and see if the type of expertise that we're seeing in those, in those folks align with who you have on staff. And again, I think it is certainly understandable and acceptable that sometimes your internal staff will have that expertise. In cases where you are requesting supplies, based on internal staff expertise, we just still would like to see, even if it's not an assessment done by an outside consultant, we still like to see some sort of internal assessment, that has resulted in a planning document that could be provided with the application. So I hope that answers the question.
I think it does. Our next question is from someone who's in a larger organization with multiple units within, and their question is, can multiple smaller units within that larger organization, such as a library and a museum, each apply for separate projects, even though they fall under one larger parent organization?
That is a great question. And the answer, thankfully, is yes. You absolutely may both apply, or multiple units within a larger organization may apply. Of course, you'll be in competition with yourselves, but it is perfectly reasonable. And we often do see that sometimes, smaller institutions or institutional units from the same organization have received funding in the same competition. So, it's not a given, but it is not a deterrent either in terms of receiving funding.
Okay, we have a lot of questions coming in, and I think if this is helpful, Adriana, there's a couple of technical ones that I think everybody would benefit from hearing the answer to about the submission process, the funds process. Mind if I take a couple of these just to give you a breather for a second?
Sounds great. Thank you.
So the first one is it possible to save but not yet submit the application while we are working on completing it? The answer is yes, through grants.gov. The process there is pretty straightforward for opening up a workspace, which is where you have all of your files, and you can work on them. You can upload new copies of older attachments before you click that submit button when you're ready to submit it. So you will have that ability to save your progress essentially on the different pieces of your application. The other question is, I might have missed this point, but is the grant a reimbursable grant, or how are the funds dispersed? And I'm glad this person is thinking ahead with this question. The way that if you are a recipient of the award, you do have to expend the funds to ask for reimbursement, or be just about to expend those funds to ask for reimbursement. So you pay for whatever is awarded to you, and then you get the money from us following a request for reimbursement. There is one last technical question here, which is, if the NEH is hoping to encourage applicants who are smaller entities, why is it requiring registration with SAM.gov? And the answer that I can provide to you on that one is that is how all federal grants are awarded through SAM.gov. So the registration process is a required step when working with the federal government to receive funds from an award. Adriana, those are the three that I had queued up that were a bit more on the, the technical logistical side. Mind give me a second to look around for maybe another one. I'll just have to scroll down here.
Sure. And yes, it is a little cumbersome to deal with, SAM.gov and grants.gov, and unfortunately, as a federal entity, that is the method to submit. I will also add that if you have not registered ever with SAM.gov or grants.gov before, you will have to get a unique identifying number, and that is sort of in place of the old DUNS numbers that used to be what were used. We're now transitioning into a new number system that is managed by the federal government. But again, all the information on that is available on the grants.gov and SAM.gov websites, which are used for all federal funding. So hopefully once you have that registration done for NEH, it also opens you up to being able to request federal funding from other agencies as well.
Totally agree with that. I'd also even add, to get that UEI number as soon as you can. You don't want to be waiting around in January for that registration process to be completed. So it's a good idea to begin that process early. One question I have here for you, Adriana, is, can we request funding to build more content for existing archives? And can costs include technology requirements?
That's a great question. Unfortunately, this program is really about preserving existing collections. So it is not for activities such as obtaining new collection items. It is not for activities involving building digital infrastructure for programming or public programming. We have other funding programs throughout the agency that would deal with developing educational content and public programming. Those would be in our divisions of education and division of public programming. So I highly recommend you peruse our NEH website in general and look at the funding programs that are available through those divisions. We don't currently have any funding programs that fund acquisition of collections at this moment.
Great. Questions keep coming in. I'm going to start here with one that addresses the More Perfect Union encouragement. Would a collection of artworks with a focus on social justice be considered applicable to the More Perfect Union criteria?
That's a great question. It may be. This criteria is broader than originally proposed when the initiative first started. So it really is focusing on, what does it mean to be part of this nation and the broad histories that make up our country. So it could be. I think that would be a great one to probably shoot us an email at preservation@nih.gov with a more specific description of the collection, so that we could have a more in-depth conversation about whether it would really fit within the initiative or not. And that's just a good reminder to all, we're here for broader conversation and discussion after today. If you want to shoot us an email, give us a call, and we can discuss what your collection items are and the projects that you're looking for funding for, to make sure that it's the right fit for this program and the different initiatives that we have within the program.
Let's see, another one here, which is about activity eligibility. If my proposal is about digitization, do I need a preservation assessment?
That's a great question. So this program does not fund digitization except for some pilot digitization which could be applicable within the A More Perfect Union program. Otherwise, outside of that special encouragement, digitization is not allowed in this program. We do have another funding program called Humanities Collections and Reference Resources. That program does fund digitization and broader planning for digitization. So I would recommend taking a look at that funding program, which does have planning and implementation levels to see if your project fits within that program.
Great. I've got a couple of questions coming up about the budget. So the first one is, how detailed does the budget need to be? Our consultant gave us a single line item budget for the assessment and workshop and another for the conservation materials.
That's appropriate. If that is what you receive from your consultant, that's absolutely fine. When you have a sense, it would depend with the materials. If the consultant is providing those materials and they have that line item, that's fine. If you are going to be purchasing the materials directly yourself, then it would be good to include a breakdown of the exact materials within your budget justification. The actual budget form itself will only allow you to probably just enter one lump number for those materials. So having that one line item will be fine. It'll be within the budget justification that you might break it down a little bit. But again, if that's included in your consultant's letter of commitment, then that's appropriate to include it in that way as well.
Great. And relatedly, do we need to know the exact cost of archival supplies that we plan to purchase?
So if your proposal is requesting just supplies and materials, then yes, you will want to have an exact amount for those supplies. If you are requesting some preliminary supplies based off of recommendations of a consultant who will be doing a preservation assessment or workshop with you, it's okay for the amount to be not quite as exact because it may be dependent on the final sort of list of supplies that are then recommended by the consultant after your assessment. So it really just depends on whether or not this is part of an ask that is including an assessment and recommendations from a consultant, or if this is an ask that is really solely about rehousing and furnishings that have already been based on a previous assessment. So I hope that answered that question.
I believe it does. Another question we have here, again, going back to the stages that you might be in terms of completing one activity and pursuing another, and also about eligible activities. We have had a conservator assess a set of objects. Can we apply to hire an outside conservator to preserve a set of objects? Thinking about those eligible activities under different encouragements we have.
Sure, that's a great question. So conservation treatment, which would be, actually making sort of adjustments and changes to the object itself to get it back to a state more akin to its original state, that is not eligible within this program unless it is an object that was damaged in a federally declared disaster area. So if you're in a federally declared disaster area and your collections receive damage, those can receive conservation treatment. For all other PAG applicants, unfortunately, conservation treatment is not eligible. Now, what is eligible would be some amount of stabilization within rehousing of that item to make sure that it's appropriate. So for example, if you have an object that needs some sort of special supports within the rehousing of that object, that's eligible. But actual treatment to the object would not be eligible unless you are requesting treatment as part of damaged collections from a federally declared disaster area.
Your mention of the federally declared disaster area encouragement is a good segue for the next question. For those of us in designated disaster areas, I'm wondering how long that designation is applicable for. For example, if we experienced damage during a hurricane during summer of this year, would we be eligible to apply under the federally declared disaster encouragement, though we are past the incident period? A good question.
That's a great question. And yes, you absolutely would be eligible. Basically, any disaster that occurred within the year prior to the application period. So, from basically our last application deadline up until this application deadline, any disaster that occurred during that period is eligible for that designation to apply.
Okay. Here's a question about the recentness of previous assessments. So our institution had a CAP survey from 1997 and CCAHA survey from 2004. Are those too old to be applicable for grant purposes?
That's a great question. It depends. Those are a bit older, and it may be worth getting a more recent assessment. It also depends on how many changes your collection has undergone. Has your collection grown since those assessments? Has there been change in the structure in which they're housed? So those are the kinds of questions that an outside panel reviewer might ask in terms of reviewing your previous assessment, and then to request funding for a recommendation from that assessment. The other part of it is, because of course many of these assessments have, medium term, short term, medium term, long term recommendations. And so some, in those cases, what an outside reviewer might want to see is which of those recommendations have gone underway. So for example, your assessment from 2004, if you've been making progress on the recommendations over time, and you can show that within the application, you say, now we're at this point, at this recommendation, we've done these short and medium term, we're at this long-term recommendation, that could be appropriate. So it's really dependent on, the changes in the collection and where they're stored over time from when that assessment was done, and how much of the recommendations have already been implemented, or how many of those recommendations have been implemented since the assessment was done. I would say something from the 90s, probably it's definitely time for a new assessment. Anything within the 2000s, it's going to be dependent on those criteria I just mentioned.
It sounds like you'd really need to make the case that your situation regarding whatever you wanted to accomplish with this grant had not really changed. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Now this one is a question, again, eligible activities, especially around environmental controls. Is climate control, such as purchasing and installing an air conditioning system, appropriate use of grant funding?
That's a great question. So something like air conditioning, HVAC, those are sort of bigger, more mechanical types of items that actually we have a different funding program that can help with those. It's called Sustaining Cultural Heritage Collections. That is a program that helps with retrofitting spaces for your collections and can deal with some of those larger HVAC purchases. Again, that has a planning and an implementation level, and also has a focus on sustainability. So, along with, needing to update your HVAC situation, you also want to be thinking about how to do that in a way that is requiring maybe less use of that HVAC as much as possible. So by also including passive measures in reconfiguring your storage spaces. For PAG, those kinds of equipments are definitely a bit larger in scope than what we're able to fund within this program. I will say again, depending on the situation for a disaster situation. So for those that have, are in the federally declared disaster situation, that might be a case where you do need to, a consultant may have come in the disaster and stated, you do need to purchase a small air conditioning unit or something of that nature, a dehumidifier to help condition the area based on that emergency situation. So that could potentially be eligible there, but again, it would be sort of much smaller scale. Otherwise, those kinds of sort of larger, conditioning of environment types of purchases would not be eligible. What is really common in PAG is to see the type of environmental monitoring equipment that helps you to determine whether or not you need to make changes in either how the collection is housed or eventually need to update, the HVAC systems. So things such as different types of data loggers would definitely be appropriate. So I hope that answers the question. It's a little complex depending on, again, the situation, whether it's just a regular PAG or one with disaster relief involved, and the sort of amount of the type of environmental controls that you're looking for.
Great. We've got another question here, and I'm happy to take this one also to just provide even a short break.
Sounds good.
Can funds be used to have our collection be professionally photographed? So unfortunately, this kind of activity that falls within the realm of digitization, reformatting type work, where the Preservation Assistance Grant generally does not fund that kind of activity. If this were a federally declared disaster area, or perhaps related to the More Perfect Union encouragement, there is a window of opportunity for eligibility in those activities. And then also our humanities collections and reference resources funding opportunity is really the reformatting funding opportunity that we offer. So I'm gonna say that I think I've answered that question, and
absolutely.
And let me see what else we have here. There's a digital question here. I wanted to ask a follow-up about not being able to invest in digital infrastructure. If our project focuses on born digital content, could we use these funds to purchase associated technology infrastructure?
So again, unfortunately, this program cannot fund that kind of purchase. At this point, really PAG can help with doing digital preservation assessments and helping to create digital policy, but cannot fund the infrastructure such as putting together either some sort of networked infrastructure for storage or purchasing cloud storage. Those kinds of funding are not available through this program. That funding could potentially be available if in relation with a digitization project through the Humanities Collections and Reference Resources Program. If you are digitizing a collection or you are creating some form of access to that collection, and part of it is going to be creating a new web platform in that way, that you would then need to have some sort of systems to preserve that. It could be possible, but I would again recommend emailing us to see if that really works with what your project is trying to do. Otherwise, there might be some opportunities within another division called the Division of Challenge Programs. They do have some opportunities for updating infrastructure, updating digital infrastructures. That is a program that does require matching funds. whereas most other programs at NEH do not. So I would just be aware of that. But unfortunately, PAG is not the place for that kind of work.
It sounds like if somebody wants to make headway in digital preservation through the Preservation Assistance Grant, the best ways to do it are by seeking a digital preservation needs assessment that can create a good roadmap to implementing future projects like adding storage or even digital preservation trainings that might help you learn techniques and strategies for creating a storage plan that might incorporate the addition of new storage infrastructure. Is that
absolutely?
About?
That's absolutely correct, Sean. Thank you. And I'll just add too that these sort of assessments and roadmaps can be great tools to then convince your organization's board and your organization's community to help fund those kinds of infrastructure more internally.
Another question in here, and I think I'll take a swing at this one if you don't mind, is if we had a recent CAP assessment and are applying for priority recommendations in that assessment, do we need to have a separate consultant involved with this consultation? And I believe the answer is not necessarily. If you have the training necessary to implement what you hope to accomplish that has been recommended in an assessment for you, then a consultant is not required or a training is not required. However, if the activity is something that maybe you don't have experience in, perhaps hypothetically, let's say an environmental monitoring consultation, and you've never done environmental monitoring, or excuse me, implementing an environmental monitoring plan is the type of thing you want to do with your follow-up award, and you've never done environmental monitoring before, you might want to have a separate consultant involved with this follow-up project. Do you have anything to add on that one, Adriana?
No, I think you definitely covered that question.
Let's see what we have next. A great question about access. What are the requirements for open access to the collection mentioned at the beginning of the presentation?
Yes, so the collection has to be available to scholars, researchers, the public in some way. So it will be up to each institution applying to sort of discuss in what ways they make the collection accessible. It could be that the collection items are made accessible through some form of public programming or education activities. It could be that they are available to researchers and the public through either open hours or by appointment only. But they just do have to be available in some way. They can't just sort of be in your institution and not usable by the public. So I will say sometimes and a collection might not be as accessible as you would like it to be, but this program is really also about helping you have the collection be preserved so that it can be more accessible, and explaining how your project activities would help increase access is a component of the narrative that you'll want to consider.
Okay, moving on to some personnel questions. Can the funding go to personnel costs, like having a part-time librarian work more hours in order to implement the preservation plan?
That's a great question, and the answer is yes. Your staff can be part of the budget request. You'll just want to make sure that the amount of funding you request for staff is in proportion to the amount of work that they will be doing on the project. But we are happy that we can include some labor costs within the budget.
Okay. Similarly, we received a CAP assessment in 2019, which recommended hiring a registrar and professional photographer. Can we hire independent contractors?
So unfortunately, in this case, the answer is probably no. that's because the activities that they might be working on don't necessarily align with the activities that are funded through PAG. So the professional photographer would be doing some sort of, reformatting, which is not possible through the PAG program, unless, again, it is either recommended to help preserve collections in a federally declared disaster area, or part of a pilot project for a more perfect union. But if you're not fitting one of those two categories, that kind of a contractor would not be appropriate within the program. And again, a registrar who would be dealing with, organizing and arranging the collection. Again, those activities, unless it's part of the more perfect union encouragement, would not be eligible within the program. So whereas, staff working on, the project of eligible activities, such as, rehousing the collection, that type of labor would be appropriate. Hiring contractors that would not be doing consultant work would not be an eligible activity.
I've got one question here that is a bit about the scoping of your overall application. Our museum has immediate facility needs, but we also could benefit from technical consultation. Are those two different applications?
It really depends. You have a budget of $10,000 within to work with. So if you can combine different activities. So for example, say you have an immediate need to get a better handle on understanding the environment. So you really want to purchase some data loggers, but you also want to have a preservation assessment. That is something that you could very likely combine into one application, to have a consultant who would come, do a general preservation assessment, and also help provide training in using that environmental monitoring equipment, and you would also be able to purchase the environmental monitoring equipment. So that's a situation where you really would be able to combine multiple activities into one application. So it's really just dependent on how much you can fit within that $10,000 limit that sort of makes sense and works together as a cohesive project for your collections.
Okay, we still have about, I think, 12 to 14 questions. So I know we're not going to be able to get to everybody in today's session, but we're also going to save every question that's been asked and get back to those individuals if they have a question that we still have not answered by the end of this session. I will say, if you have asked us a question and you're labeled as anonymous, we're going to prioritize those right now for getting answered, but also if you could please provide your email information in addition to those questions, that'll help us get back to you, because right now we may not be able to answer those folks who have asked anonymous questions. So I'm going to start with one of those anonymous questions here. Back to the qualifications of consultants. If somebody has a background in preservation, does that necessarily mean that they have a degree or years of particular experience? How would you define background in preservation?
Sure. So it could be a combination of those factors. Often it could be somebody who has a degree in conservation. It could also be somebody, with a degree in library and information sciences that has done focused work in preservation activities, because that is sort of a separate focus within what can be studied there, and has had experience with that kind of work. And Sean, who you might be able to also answer this a little bit better as somebody with that kind of a background, but again, it can be a combination of those factors.
I think that answers it perfectly. Maybe what I'll say, and I hope I'm not repeating anything, because I'm also letting people know they need to provide their emails with their questions right now, but I may say that when you want to see somebody who has a background in preservation, it's usually a combination of some kind of degree that might come from a, a library science school or a museum studies program, typically some kind of a master's degree. A conservator will have typically some kind of degree in conservation work, or they may be bench trained. So some direct experience working with collections would be appropriate. I would say that it's important to make sure that you're working with somebody that has done preservation assessments before. That can be really advantageous because writing those reports, doing the assessment, it's a kind of consultation experience that is an experience unto itself beyond simply knowing how to apply good preservation practices. So making sure you find somebody who knows how to do an assessment, says they've done them before, that can be beneficial, and making sure their materials knowledge is directly related to the materials in your collection. Speaking from past experience, I don't know much about museum object care, and people have asked me to consult on museum object care when I did paper, book, photo, and digital. So, you want to make sure that you're working with somebody who has worked with the specific kinds of objects in your collections. That will be something that a panelist would be looking for. I hope that's some helpful additional context to that question.
That is perfect. Thank you, Sean. I think with that, we are at the end of our time. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I want to thank Sean for helping out with our Q&A and adding such great insights. I just want to remind everyone, please, if your question didn't get answered, we will try to reach out to you, to those that we have the information. Otherwise, you can email us at preservation@nih.gov or call us at 202-606-8570. Please feel free to ask us specific questions, or if you just want to sort of discuss your collection and the project ideas that you have, we're happy to have those broader discussions as well, even in terms of helping you sort of strategize and think about, how do you connect your collection to a broader significance in terms of broader themes in American history or broader themes in humanity's significance. So we're happy to have those discussions with you. Please feel free to reach out to us. And again, thank you all for joining us today. And we hope that this has been helpful for you.